Ethan Wilcox had been living in Seattle for 6 years, long enough for the novelty of the city's skyline and the charm of its unpredictable weather to fade into routine. What once felt alive and vibrant had grown strangely distant. The city moved around him, with its usual speed, cars humming through wet streets, people rushing between coffee shops and offices, lights blinking through the fog, but none of it touched him anymore. It was as though he was standing behind a pane of glass, close enough to witness the movement of life, but too far to feel part of it. His days followed a quiet, predictable rhythm. He worked long hours at a software company, returning each evening to an apartment that felt more like a temporary shelter than a home. His friends had drifted into marriages, careers, new responsibilities, and new cities. They kept in touch, but only lightly, birthday messages, brief holiday greetings, the occasional check-in that came too late or from too far away to carry real warmth. It wasn't bitterness Ethan felt. It was something quieter, something hollow, a numbness that lived between his ribs and settled into his evenings like fog. Every night, he stepped into his silent apartment, dropped his keys on the counter, and walked through the same motions, warming frozen dinners, sorting emails he had already read, rewatching shows he barely paid attention to, and scrolling through photos of people celebrating milestones he wasn't part of. Nothing hurt. And maybe that was the problem. Pain reminded you that you were alive. Numbness simply whispered that you were fading. One night, after microwaving a bowl of soup and realizing he couldn't remember the last time anyone had cooked for him, something inside him tightened. A quiet ache he had ignored for too long. An ache for warmth, for companionship, for someone to care that he existed beyond being another name in someone's contact list. He didn't know that night would mark a shift. A small change that would move his life in a direction he hadn't expected. When he returned home from work, the air inside his apartment felt as still as always. He set down his bag, exhaled the weight of the day, and moved toward the couch. But before he could fall back into the familiar evening loop, he heard 3 light knocks on his door. It startled him more than it should have. No one visited him unannounced. No one visited him at all. When he opened the door, Mara stood there, with a bowl covered in foil, cheeks slightly flushed as if she had walked quickly yet hesitated before knocking. She introduced herself softly, explaining she lived 2 doors down and had made too much soup. Her voice was gentle, unsure, but sincere. Ethan expected her to hand him the bowl and leave instantly. Instead, she lingered, shifting her weight, the silent question hanging between them, and something deep inside him, unused, stiff from years of solitude, nudged him to step back and invite her in. That decision, small as it seemed, changed everything. Mara entered his quiet apartment with the kind of presence that didn't disturb the space but warmed it. They spoke easily, surprisingly so. She told him about her job at a bookstore, the odd noises in the building, the unpredictability of Seattle's weather. Ethan listened, noticing the softness in her voice, the way her smile illuminated the room, the gentle calm she carried. It had been a long time since someone made his silence feel comforting rather than suffocating. She stayed longer than expected. Neither of them mentioned the soup cooling untouched on the counter. And when she finally left, the apartment felt different, not loud, not bright, but gently changed. A little warmer, a little less empty. Her visits continued in the days that followed, sometimes with bread from her favorite bakery, sometimes with a book she thought he'd like, and sometimes just with the simple intention of sitting quietly in his presence. Mara didn't demand attention or fill the air with constant talk. She simply existed beside him, in a way that felt natural, like she was meant to be there. Ethan began to notice the subtle things. The way she hummed under her breath when she thought no one was listening. The way she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating. The way her eyes softened when she talked about her past. The lonely stretches she didn't fully describe, but hinted at just enough for him to understand. She carried her own ache, her own silences, her own fear of letting someone close. Maybe that was why they fit so easily into each other's quiet spaces. Evenings became a rhythm, warm light spilling through the blinds, soft conversation drifting between them, their shared silences growing more meaningful than words. Sometimes they cooked together, laughing over small mistakes. Other times they simply sat near each other, reading or resting after long days. The connection grew gently, slowly, like something fragile but determined. Ethan found himself anticipating her visits, straightening the apartment, brewing tea the way she liked it, listening for the sound of her footsteps in the hallway. And Mara showed her own care in small ways, bringing him tea when he looked tired, offering encouragement when he doubted himself, noticing his moods before he had the chance to hide them. One rainy night, as water streaked down the windows, Mara rested her head against his shoulder. The quiet intimacy of the moment stirred something in Ethan he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. A mixture of longing, relief, and hope. Words rose in his chest but stayed unspoken. She didn't need them. Not yet. Their closeness didn't require labels or declarations. It simply unfolded, night after night, in shared breaths and gentle glances. And yet, beneath the warmth, there was fear, a hesitation, an unspoken question neither of them was ready to bring into the light. The answer arrived one quiet Sunday afternoon. Sunlight pooled across the floor as Mara sat at the edge of the couch, her hands twisting nervously. Ethan sensed the shift instantly, the careful distance in her posture, the weight in her silence. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost trembling. She admitted she had let herself grow to close, that their time together had awakened feelings she had long buried, feelings she didn't expect, feelings she wasn't sure she had the right to feel. Ethan felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with recognition. He had been feeling the same fragile pull, the same tenderness, the same careful hope. He had simply been afraid to name it. Before he could speak, Mara's phone vibrated on the table. One look at the message shifted her expression, her mouth tightening, her eyes dimming with something like guilt. "There's something I haven't told you," she whispered. The air between them stilled. The warmth of the room cooled just enough to send a shiver down Ethan's spine. He waited, patient, steady, bracing himself without retreating. Mara drew in a deep breath, and shared the truth she had been holding back. She wasn't fully alone in her life. There was someone she had grown distant from, someone she no longer loved, someone she had tried to leave emotionally long before she had found the courage to leave physically. A relationship worn down by silence, by neglect, by mutual drifting, but a relationship still present enough to complicate everything. She confessed that her heart had wandered toward Ethan long before her life had untangled itself, that she had sought warmth in his presence without fully confronting the cold reality she was still tied to. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't planned. It wasn't even something she fully understood. It was human. It was lonely. It was the quiet kind of infidelity that begins not with touch, but with longing. Her voice broke as she admitted she never meant to involve him in that messy part of her life. Never meant to find comfort in him. Never meant to fall for him when she was still bound by something unfinished. Ethan listened, every word settling into him like a weight, yet not pushing him away, because beneath the complexity of her confession, he heard the truth he recognized in himself. Loneliness makes choices before the heart can catch up. He reached for her gently, their hands meeting in a slow, trembling touch. He didn't judge her. He didn't pull away. He simply held space for her confession, understanding that the line between connection and infidelity is often drawn quietly, long before anyone crosses it. Mara's breath shook with relief and fear. Ethan's silence was steady, offering comfort without promising answers. They both understood something in that moment. Not everything between them was simple. Not everything would be easy. But the bond they had built wasn't fragile because of truth. It was strengthened by it. As the sunlight shifted across the room, and the quiet hum of the city filled the background, Ethan felt something settle inside him. A realization that love, or something close to it, doesn't arrive cleanly wrapped. It arrives through imperfections, through confessions, through the soft ache of wanting someone even when timing is wrong. Mara's honesty didn't break their connection. It deepened it. Because intimacy isn't just closeness, it's truth, even when truth is complicated. The apartment around them seemed to soften again, becoming a place of beginnings, not endings. A place where the people who had carried loneliness like a second skin could finally breathe without fear. The story between them was far from over. In fact, it had only just reached the edge of something real, something tender, something uncertain, but worth the risk. As Mara finally exhaled, and Ethan met her gaze with gentle understanding, both of them felt the subtle shift. The moment the heart opens completely, the moment when connection becomes undeniable, the moment when infidelity stops being a shadow and becomes a truth that must be faced, not with regret, but with courage. Their story was only beginning.